Imagine a world before IPAs. Can you even do that, Taplines listener? It existed. Around the turn of this century, the American craft brewing landscape was awash in amber ales, brown ales, lagers, and comparatively few versions of the hop-forward India Pale Ales that would come to dominate the category a decade later and, for the most part, still do. The ones you could get a hold of back in 1999 were mostly well-balanced West Coast-style IPAs. A continuously hopped Imperial IPA from an East Coast brewery was quite literally unheard of. And yet the nation, nay, the world, was about to hear tell of exactly that. Joining us today on Taplines is Sam Calagione, the founder of Delaware's Dogfish Head Brewery. He's on the show to tell us about the serendipitous, Rube Goldbergian, MacGyver-esque genesis of 90 Minute, the first commercially packaged Imperial IPA the world has ever known. Its 9% ABV and 90 IBUs may not sound that scandalous today, but back then it was an outrageous new foray into parts unknown for the fledgling craft brewing industry. It's Sam Calagione, it's 90 Minute India Pale Ale, it's the continuously hopped history of a beer that foretold the category's future, and it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. Joining Taplines now, it's a man who needs no introduction in the craft brewing industry, but he's going to get one anyway here on Taplines, the Vine Pair podcast. It's Sam Calagione, the co-founder of Dogfish Head, the beloved brewery in Milton, Delaware, who's joining us today to take a little stroll down memory lane. Sam, welcome to Taplines.
Taplines blow away.
Yes, that is going to be our new theme song. Sam, thank you.
Good to see you, Dave.
Likewise, always a pleasure. It's always a treat when we get to chat. And today we're going to talk about some really fun piece of Dogfish Head's history that some people know, and I think at this point there's an entire maybe generation of new younger drinkers, legal drinking age, of course, who maybe don't know this history. So we're gonna do all that in a second. But Sam, before we crack into it, literally and figuratively, where are you joining us from today?
I am. There's a map with a tree in my background for good reason. I'm up at the spiritual home of Dogfish, which is coastal Maine, as opposed to the physical home of Dogfish, where we started the brewery, which is in coastal Delaware. So greetings from mid-coast Maine near Booth Bay Harbor, where I'm looking out at a jut of land called Dogfish Head, Maine.
Nice. And you vacationed there for how many years at this point?
So my folks got a house up here, just a cabin on a island with a wood stove. Maybe when I was 15. So, and my dad was buying good beers like Anchor, Rest in Peace, or We'll See What's Going to Happen, and Moosehead and Sam Adams. Those are the beers I was stealing from my dad's fridge, and that must have informed my decision to start homebrewing after college. And away we went. But we've had this affinity for the coast of Maine since my folks bought the cabin out there. And I was actually 1 mile from where we're sitting when I told my dad I wanted to open a brewery. I was on a jog with him up here, and I was an English major. Thought I was going to be a journalist, and he's like, I was taking classes in the graduate program at Columbia. He's like, how are your classes going? I was like, to be honest with you, I've stopped going because I'm writing a business plan to open a brewery after he paid for my college education. And he was quiet for a minute while he was running, and then he looked up and he pointed at a sign and said, you know what, Dogfish Head would be a good name for a brewery. So I got his okay to go on this journey and the name of our brewery in one fell swoop.
Man, I love that. And I never forget the fact that you are an English major. I was an English major in college. I now work as a journalist, of course.
So cool.
But those who don't know you may not realize that you're a man of many talents. You're a man of letters, and of course, a passionate fan and lover of music as well, in addition to being one of the more innovative American brewers that is working these days.
Well, Dave, I got to say, my daughter's about to graduate next year with a journalism degree at UMiami, and my son graduated an English degree from Brown. So all you, me, and them are scared shitless about AI.
Well, I'll be going down with the ship. You can find me writing to the very last, but we're going to go down a little bit of a different lane. We're going to go in a little bit of a happier direction, and sometimes it's happy to look to the future, but oftentimes here on Taplines, we enjoy are opportunities to look to the past. Sam, we're going to be talking today about a beer that, much like yourself, needs no introduction amongst real true heads of the craft beer landscape. But for those who maybe again are younger and aren't as familiar, we're going to be talking about 90-minute Imperial India Pale Ale, Dogfish Heads, 9% alcohol by volume, heavy hitter. That is a delightful beer. Sam was kind enough, the folks at Dogfish Head were kind enough to send me one to sample while we talk today. Sam, you've got one of your own over there, and we're gonna have a little chat about this beer and about sort of how it came about, of course, because it's a very unique story, but also what its significance was in the marketplace at that time. So let's fire up the time machine and scroll ourselves back to the late 90s. Dogfish Head is open, of course. It's a little brew pub at that point in Milton, Delaware. 1995 is when you guys first started. And this is not the beer that you started with, Sam. What beers were you brewing when Dogfish Head first started up?
Yeah, so when we opened up, I wrote a business plan when I was living in New York City, and the first page was this Emerson quote, which is still kind of our rallying cry. And then the second page I wrote, Dogfish will be the first commercial brewery in America committed to brewing the majority of our beers outside the Reinheitsgebot, incorporating culinary ingredients. So for your viewers that don't know the Reinheitsgebot, it was a Bavarian beer purity law that was enacted in 1516, 500 years ago. It said beer could only be made with malt water and hops, not other ingredients. And that commercially became the de facto norm around the globe. And with craft brewing in America, we started brewing these fresh, robust, unpasteurized beers as a community in the 70s and 80s. But no one was really focused on bringing unexpected culinary ingredients into commercial brewing. And we decided that's how we would create our little niche. So I intentionally opened our little tiny brewery within a restaurant that had an open kitchen, and we used the same refrigerators and stuff to put food on the wood stove and the wood oven and the wood grill, as I would use those same refrigerators to load them with pureed grapes or honey or raisins or maple syrup or pumpkin meat and bring them out to introduce into the brewing process. So out of the gates, our best-selling beers were beers like Raison d'etre, made with raisins and beet sugars, Aprihop, which I think was the first fruit-infused IPA, was early Immortal, which was brewed with maple syrup from my family farm up here in New England, and juniper berries. And it really wasn't until 90 Minute that we started making, what would be recognized as IPA style beer.
Yeah. Chicory Stout, too, I think, if I'm not mistaken, right? Weren't you guys brewing?
Chicory Stout was right out of the gates, 95.
Yeah.
Originally, until the federal government told me I had to stop, it was brewed with organic Mexican coffee and St. John's wort, making it America's first antidepressant depressant.
And the federal government, of course, had something to say about that. And
didn't like it.
I'm sure very, very kindly and politely told you, hey, Sam, stop doing that immediately.
Exactly. That's why you can't find St. John's wort on the label anymore.
That's right. Well, so in 1995, and of course, like towards the end of that decade, which is where we're going to focus in on in a moment, people were drinking very different types of beers than they are now. Anyone who has spent any time even, casually strolling down the beer aisle for the last 10, 15 years, is almost, sort of innately familiar with the concept of India Pale Ale. It is, of course, the craft brewing segment's longtime leader in terms of style. It's in terms of both dollars and volume. It's a really just sort of juggernaut style, but that was not always the case. And if you look just a little bit further into the past, into those late 90s, what were people drinking at that time? Of course, they were starting to drink some of the Dogfish Head stuff that you guys were putting out, but what were the popular styles?
Yeah, maybe a half a decade ago, I went back and looked at 1999, the year we released 90 Minute, to look at what were the most popular craft beer style categories that were kind of tracked at retail. And they were amber, pale ale, seasonal. It was a generic right. Called seasonal. I think those were the big three. And you're right. It's come so far. Like IPA wasn't even the top 5 when we started 90 Minute, and now I think it's like one out of every other craft beers made by one of the 9,000 American breweries is some form of an IPA.
Yeah. Was brown ale still going strong at that point, or had that kind of faded by then?
It was, but it wasn't up there because that was the era where New Belgium was on a tear. So
Right.
Amber's numbers were high with their fat tire, and of
Yep.
course Sierra was a juggernaut, and Lager was top 5 because of Sam Adams. But no, even brown ale was probably 6, 7 down around where porters and stouts were.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned they're in Heizkaba and this idea of, the purity law and this idea that beer has to be a specific type of thing made with specific ingredients and can't deviate from that. You yourself have a long history of deviating from everything. You've made a hell of a career out of it, obviously. Off-centered is part of the mantra at Dogfish Head. But also, you've got to run this business, right? You've got this brew pub. You're 4 years in. You're having success at that point, but you're also thinking about, okay, how do we grow? How do we make this work? Because these were still, in 1995 and 1999, there was no guarantee that craft beer was going to be a real industry ongoing. There were still people at that point who were talking about it as a fad. When you started thinking about, okay, what's the next move? You stumbled on an India Pale Ale. You stumbled on the India Pale Ale that we're drinking and a very different beer, which I think the contrast between the two, between Midas Touch and 90 Minute IPA, is really instructive, sort of getting into your head about what your plans were, how you saw the market shaping up. But how did you come to land on the India Pale Ale and the 90 Minute specifically?
So, basically, to tell the 90-minute story ahead of the Midas Touch story, but they were both existentially important beers to Dogfish
Agreed.
because, like you
And
said, Dave,
to the industry. And to the
well,
industry.
that's nice. That's nice. If they didn't happen when they happened, I don't know that Dogfish would have not gone bankrupt. To be honest, because right out of the gates, our restaurant brewery was successful. This little beach town in Delaware. We were packed. Memorial Day through Labor Day in this beach town, and it's become a lot more year round since the mid '90s. But we were doing great as a restaurant, and then with great bravado, I'm like, wow, everyone around here really digs our beer. We're the first brew pub in the first state. I want to expand. I want to start distributing coast to coast these exotic beers made with culinary ingredients. So we built a bigger brewery, 30-barrel brewery, 10 miles from our brew pub, and it was super inefficient. I built it out of used dairy and canning equipment that didn't really work well. So it was like for every sellable 3 sellable cases of beer that came off the bottling line, 1 was shorties and we couldn't sell it, which is the entire profit margin. So we pissing into the wind trying to grow this piece of crap brewery. But then in 1999, we came up with both Midas Touch and 90 Minute. We can talk about Midas later, but the 90 Minute impetus was each morning. This is how I would start the brewing water in the morning. I would go out and mix an iced coffee with a chicory stout from the tap. We're not open yet, and we had a mattress in the cellar. So as the water was heating, I would have a half iced coffee, half chicory stout, in a pint glass with ice. Smoke a cigarette, Camel Light. It's freaking terrible, but it's true. I'd have 1 cigarette to end and begin the day back then. I haven't smoked in 20 years, but and I'd put on a little Sally Jesse Raphael or a little, morning TV and sit there and chill while the water heated. And that morning I was watching some culinary show. I don't know what network, if it was like a major network and they had a chef as a guest. I should have wrote it down, but I didn't. And the chef was talking about if he was cooking with cracked pepper. And he said, if I add a little pinch of cracked pepper the whole hour that I simmer this stew, the flavor and the complexity of this black pepper will be woven in more gracefully in a nuanced, positive way than if I had that same volume of pepper all at once. And I thought, as I listened to that, whoa, maybe this is an idea I can bring into brewing, because traditionally with beers, particularly IPAs, there's an early hop addition for bitterness and then one at the end for aroma. What if I just add little tiny pinches of hops the whole 90 minutes that I boil this beer? And then I also thought, hey, I remember being out at this Salvation Army on the highway a few weeks ago. I was buying flannel shirts that the farmers locally, give away. You can buy them for $5. And I remember seeing this thing that might work. So I went out to the highway, and it was a vibrating football game that some of our viewers might remember. And I basically MacGyvered the vibrating football game, drilled some holes in a 5-gallon bucket, duct taped it with two 2x4s going down the game, and then by changing the angle of the game and the diameter of the holes, I figured out how to make it where it would vibrate at a certain angle where the hot pellets would be released out the bucket, down the vibrating game, into the boiling beer, because I had this contraption set up on a step ladder over my 5-barrel brewing system. So it was an idea that I was like, I don't know if it's going to work, but it did. And we continued to hop the beer for 90 minutes. We made it 9% alcohol and 90 international bittering units. So everything was tied to this 9 theme. And first batch came out great.
And so, man, I love that story. And I think I was doing a little bit of research before this. It was the original was the Tudor True Action electronic football game. Listeners, you can probably sort of envision what we're talking about. It's a vibrating like metal surface, and the little figurines, if you're using it for what it's actually designed for, which is to play the arcade game, little figurines will move, and you can kind of get them to advance on the field. Sam obviously jerry rigged that into something totally different, which is how you made 90-minute. But you did, quick aside here, I think Dogfish had recently did a collaboration with Tudor on a football game, right?
Exactly, yeah. If you go look up, Tudor vibrating football, you can go to their website and get it branded with 60-minute and 90-minute vibrating football game. And we announced like a week before the Super Bowl that Dogfish is proudly the only beer sponsor, big or small, of the World Championships of Vibrating Football. So pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, I love that. That's a coveted sponsorship. The electronic football World Championships, as we talk about a lot here on Taplines. Of course, beer endorsements are really, really vital in the sports space. So congratulations to Dogfish Head on locking that in exclusivity, nonetheless. And that's a big spot for you, man.
Right. Next is blimps.
Yeah, that's right. I like it. Going after all the primo placements. I'm in for it. So listen, so 90-minute, you figure out how to sort of rig up this system using something from the Salvation Army and also OSHA's worst nightmare, perhaps. But you start to get this beer that you're happy with, and you think, okay, cool. Like, it's 1999. We're going to zag when everyone else is zigging. This is something new and exciting that we think drinkers are really going to respond to. You put it out in 1999. I think it is the first Imperial IPA ever to be packaged for commercial sale in the United States, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. But my buddy Greg Cook, who ran Stone Brewery, reached out to me in 2000. He's like, "Hey, just wanted to let you know, we thought we brewed the first Imperial IPA, but we did the research with the TTB, and 90-minute was the first label submitted with the word Imperial next to IPA." And he said not even just in America, but even in England, because for
Sure.
folks that might not be familiar with the lineage of the style, IPAs were certainly a British invention. Imperial stouts were an English invention, but we as Americans came up with the Imperial IPA style. And I just thought, hey, it's going to be an IPA, but it's going to be massive in ABV and gravity. So I'm going to steal the language from Imperial Stout and put it in front of the word, IPA. And that was 90-minute. When we first released it, a lot of brewers in DC, Baltimore, and Philly, the first bottle was a 750 ml champagne bottle with a photo of a circus freak hammering a nail into his skull, because that's how intense the hop impression was.
Yeah.
So I'm going around trying to sell this champagne bottle of beer called Imperial IPA, 9% alcohol. That's 5 times the hops of even normal craft beers. And a bunch of the local brewers in the cities around us started calling Dogfish Head the one and done brewing company, because no one would ever have a second beer after a pint of 90-minute.
Yeah. That's hilarious. So you've got the beer, you're packaging it in the 750 milliliters, which is, even at that time, a really unusual package. Obviously, there would be a time where you'd start to see more bombers, you'd start to see more magnums coming out in the craft brewing industry, but that's still an unusual package. And it's this, to the American drinking public at that time, even though Imperial IPA now is very much in the lexicon, even for casual drinkers, this is an unfamiliar, unusual beer. Sam, how did it go at first?
Well, like I said, they were calling us the one and done brewing company. I really,
But those were just your
I,
competitors. How are drinkers responding?
friendly competitors. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, what we always, my wife always ran Dogfish social media, and she's great at it. I was sort of the analog face of the company, and like you, I'm a storyteller, an English major, and so for me, the thing I was really looking forward to was opening New York City market, which I did in like '98, and I would drive my pickup truck up there with 2 pallets of beer. I would drop them off the distributors, visit some great craft beer joints, but then I would knock on the doors of, Food and Wine magazine. Let's see up there, Esquire,
Sure, all the
GQ,
men's magazines.
Interview,
Yep. Bon Appetit.
yeah,
Yeah.
Bon Appetit. And so I would knock door to door and I'd say, I got cold samples. Can I come in at 4 o'clock and just host a happy hour for you guys and talk beer? And, 3 out of 5 times, usually they'd say yes. So the yada, yada, yada is we bought the equipment to fill champagne bottles, mostly for Midas Touch, which is a beer wine hybrid and ancient ale that we're talking about. And I was like, I bought all this expensive used equipment from California. Let's do a second beer when we release Midas Touch. It's a beer wine hybrid, Midas Touch. Let's just do the crazy 90-minute, the thing we made with the continual hopping device. And away we went. And then, like 3 months after we launched it, first Midas Touch was getting all the love from national media as the ancient ale that we brought back from the dead. And that was, we were on Today's Show from Food and Wine. But then Esquire named 90 Minute the best IPA and best beer in America, I think. And it was an awesome moment for us, and really did. Then the beer publications wrote about Esquire writing about it, and it became this thing that I think would be hard, Dave, to replicate in this moment where print media wasn't something that people were. Back then, it was really meaningful to get a hit like that.
Totally, yeah. That's a much more powerful press hit in 1999 than it is even 10 years later. Forget about 24 years later. Social media barely, in fact, didn't really exist at that time. But to the extent that it did, it was forums and message boards and, communities would gather because they had like-minded interests. And that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was part of where 90 Minute first really kind of found its traction, right? I mean, you guys got a lot of love from, it must have been Beer Advocate at the time, right? Which one was it? Yeah, Beer Advocate, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say like what Spanx was to TikTok, 90 Minute was to Beer Advocate.
So, wow. I remember. Sam Calagione has the pop culture range, people. That is an SAT analogy for the ages.
For a slim niche of college kids. But seriously, I was out mowing my lawn, and as I mentioned, Mariah ran our social media and our website communications. She yells out the window to me with my son, like attached to her in a baby Bjorn. She's like, "Hey, these two brothers run the biggest beer lovers website where they just do reviews of beers, and 90 Minutes the best rated beer on their website. They'd love to do an interview with you." I remember like mowing the lawn, like stopping and being like, these guys are trying to make a living running a website about beer? Oh my gosh, I definitely want to talk to them. So away we went, and and what was cool, David, in that era, the beer, there wasn't like an Untapped, there wasn't really a network of social media connection and to beer. And so what happened is when they did that interview and Beer Lovers Coast to Coast saw 90 Minute was the best rated beer on Beer Advocate, retail stores across the country, beer bars across the country, little startup mom and a pop, 2 vans distributing companies around the country just started reaching out to our little brewery in Delaware. Hey, where can I get your beer in Madison, Wisconsin? Where can I get it in Portland, Oregon? And it really helped us set up our distribution network to go coast to coast.
Man, that's so crazy. I mean, obviously, it's a fantastic beer, of course, and it is in the, sort of American craft beer pantheon. It's canonical, I think. But even so, it's just so crazy, like, that was still possible. Now, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, this idea that, like, one beer can put you on the map, can help you start setting up a far-flung distribution network, can really kind of, like, forget being the one and done brewery. You became sort of that set Dogfish on the course to become the brewery that it would go on to be and grow into today. And it's like that's just like as you look back at that, Sam, like not to denigrate the beer at all, which like I said is fantastic, but like do you how much of this do you feel like was like just incredibly lucky timing?
I think that's definitely a part of it. Where you look at, I don't think anyone in that era would have envisioned a world where the majority of craft beer in America was some iteration of the IPA style. When we had German companies building us massive brewing tanks, they
Right.
saw the amount of hops we were putting in our beer, and they're like, "That's irresponsible. We're not going to build tanks that can take that much hops." And they made me sign off a waiver that said, "I agree that these tanks shouldn't have the amount of hops." And it was just like the world was not where it is today, with a sort of loophole and threshold shift that our palates have collectively navigated. And so yeah, I don't know. I think some of it was, I'm not sure if luck as much as it was just like good listening, like, translating that cooking show into beer. And then, seeing that wine drinkers were looking at craft beer and liked the intensity of flavor, but more approachable pricing of a champagne bottle of beer than certain wines. It was definitely kismet, I'd say, is more than luck. Good timing, I guess.
Well put. Let's talk a little bit more about, I mean, obviously the cooking show was the inspiration for the method that you used for 90 Minute. But you've had a long career of incorporating culinary techniques into the way you brew, and viewing beer as an agricultural product, as a culinary product, was sort of core to the ethos that you set out to brew with Dogfish Head, and of course your other peers at the time. How did that sort of shape the path that Dogfish Head was on? I mean, nowadays we don't necessarily think of craft beer as culinary because it's just craft beer. We know it. Like, there's no reason to call it, it's like something else because it's just craft beer. It's very familiar to the American consumer base. But based on sort of my awareness of it when I was, started, getting into craft beer in the late aughts, was that it was still a very useful point of comparison. I would love to hear you unpack that a little bit because you were on that tip, 10 years prior, all the way back when you were 15 years prior, all the way back when you first started Dogfish Head. Why was the culinary
Yeah.
comparison so important or useful at that time?
I think because it was such a unique perspective as for a commercial brewery in
Mm,
the mid '90s, and my coworkers, Mark Safrick, Jake, our brewers from Delaware, were just hanging out with a bunch of brewers from around the country. Our friend Matt and the gang at the Vale Brewery down in Richmond. I know you're from that neck of the woods
that's right.
too,
That's right.
so we're great friends with those guys, and they invited us down to the festival they had this weekend. And we had a blast. And, I'd say the majority of the beers at the different booths had some culinary ingredients in them. And that's a beautiful thing. But when Dogfish was starting, there was no one. I mean, I can think of Anchor Steam's Christmas Ale had spruce tips in it. And,
Sure.
maybe Sam Adams would do a seasonal, like a cranberry lambic, but no one was focused on culinary ingredients. So that's why we really leaned into making sure it was part of our branding, off-centered message that our exploration of goodness was a culinary, agricultural exploration, not just a beer traditional recipe, exploration. And you mentioned, Dave, today you don't hear that as much, and that's very much true. Like, for example, we were one of the first craft distilleries to open in America. We built our first distillery over 2 decades ago. And on our canned cocktails, which we've been working on the recipes for over 20 decades, and canned cocktails is now a really fast growing part of our business. But we actually write on the canned cocktail culinary crafted. And we've learned that the younger drinker today doesn't need to hear that. Like you said, they kind
Mm,
of grew up with interesting flavors, unexpected combinations of fruits and ingredients. So as we move to evolve our packaging, we're actually going to take off culinary crafted because it's unnecessary. It's like people know if Dogfish is brewing something with, recognizable fruits, herbs, and spices. It's part of their history that it came from the inspiration of a global view of ag and creativity, a chef's creativity, just liquid creativity.
Man, the fact that that's a given now has to be somewhat edifying for you, right? I mean, that's incredible that, to see that over the course of your career, it now just becomes part of the visual vernacular, the lexicon. People just understand Dogfish Head and other, peer breweries from that time as innately culinary to the point where you don't even have to say it.
Yeah, and we're proud, if you look at kind of the timeline of when that was our focus, but we're equally proud of all the, American indie craft breweries who have embraced a broader definition of beer. We just recently released a beer called Bodegoza with our pals at Talea Brewery in Brooklyn. And in
Sure.
their brewery, it's two women that own it, and part of their mission is to bring people that are uncomfortable with craft beer stereotypes into the world of beer. And for example, for them, their best-selling flight is fruited sours, because they'll challenge anyone that comes to
Sure.
their building and say, you think you don't like beers, try these. If you like cocktails, you might like this one. If you like white wine, you might like this one. So those culinary ingredients, I think, really help us, especially in this moment where young legal drinking age people, probably some of them are rebelling against what their parents had in their fridge, and that now could be Sierra Nevada Pale, Dogfish 60 Minutes, Sam Adams Lager. But if they grew up on the era of seltzer and canned cocktails, beers that have these culinary influences could get them to consider craft beer for the first time, the younger drinkers.
It's a great point. It's something, a few different folks in the industry who I trust very much to have their finger on the pulse like you do, like Bart Watson, for example, at the Brewers Association earlier in 2023, he was presenting somewhere in New England, I want to say. And that was the point that he made was, younger drinkers are entering their drinking journey at different points besides craft. Craft beer has a lot to offer them, but no longer is this the gateway. No longer is this the necessarily going to be the default way they sort of strike off on their higher quality, drinking journey. And I think your point about these culinary ingredients being really attractive and sort of simpatico with a lot of the things that those consumers are looking for, I think is well taken and is hopefully one that all craft breweries, all 9,700 of them across the country, are taking close note of, because it definitely rates. Sam, I want to take a look back. We have the benefit of hindsight, of course. You were kind enough to bring us to 1999 and talk about how 90 Minute came to be. But now we have, re-entered the present tense here. And for those listeners who have made it this far, you probably already know this, and Sam's too humble to toot his own horn here, but there are some accolades along the way that I think are relevant specifically to the conversation about culinary, adjacency of beer or of craft brewing as a culinary pursuit. I'm talking on one hand about your long dalliance with the James Beard Foundation. Sam was nominated 7 times for a James Beard Award before finally and deservedly winning in 2017 for the Outstanding Wine, Spirits, or Beer Professional from the James Beard Foundation. So that was a big moment, and I think I remember covering it at the time or reading about it at the time, and I think a validation of a lot of what you had been working towards, not only with 90 Minute, with Midas Touch, with all of these other beers that we've talked about over the course of the conversation. The other thing I want to bring up is the fact that the Tudor True Action football table, the electronic football table that you first used to hop those first batches of 90 Minute, is now in the Smithsonian National Museum in Washington, D.C. They've got what is it called? It's the American Brewing History Initiative, I think, run by Teresa McCullough. So, Sam, obviously you don't set out to do these things. You're not chasing awards necessarily, and you're not chasing being entered into the permanent collection at the Smithsonian. But you did do those things. It's really obviously very impressive. Like I said at the top, you're one of the more innovative brewers I think that's working today, and you've made a huge mark on the industry. And it didn't exactly start with 90 Minute, but that was one of the key early wins you had.
Yeah.
This is a long, long wind up for my question, which is we've talked a lot about what this beer means to Dogfish Head, means to the industry, and means to American drinkers. What does it mean to you?
It means intensity. I mean, I drink Sequench and 60 Minute and Citrus Squall more frequently to 90 Minute now, and maybe that wasn't the case when I was 30 and making it. But when I drink 90 Minute, it is kind of a liquid time capsule. Like for me, it's like the most like homage. Like I see this music video of the last 25 years of my life that starts with the smoke clearing and the hair metal video with that first 750 mil bottle of 90 Minute. It really was the first moment that gave me faith that Dogfish could make a national impact on the beer community. Before that, we were just kind of throwing at the shit at the wall and trying to do something really, punk rock esque and stand out in a already semi crowded field, 600 breweries back then, not 9,700. So that was like a really critical moment. When I think of like probably 5 or 6 moments of on the professional side, coming up with Nick 90 and Midas at the same time was the start. I would say coming up with Sequench Ale was equally critical in my view of amazing moments. And then, as you mentioned, getting our continual hopping invention into the Smithsonian, winning a James Beard Award. Those would be 4, and I'll have to think hard if there's a fifth. But those were huge. Those were huge.
Well, you let us. If you think of another one, you're always welcome back on the show. Before we go, I want to talk about another invention that is not specifically involved in the 90 Minute creation, but is very, very synonymous with Dogfish Head and with your sort of mad tinkering, your MacGyvering down in Milton, Delaware. I'm talking about Randall the Enamel Animal. For a lot of craft beer newcomers who are coming to the industry for the first time over the course of the past 5 years, may not be a familiar phrase, but as a way to pique their interest, Sam, as a way to maybe queue up round 2 of Sam Calagione in the future, if we could be so lucky here at Taplines. Tell us a little bit about Randall the Enamel Animal. Take us out on a high note. Tease it a little bit.
Sure. So if you Google search Randall Dogfish Head, we've now, with our friends at AC Beverage, designed the ultimate Randall, and basically it's a contraption we invented that you put anything you want in the chamber. Sounds like a bong, but it's not.
It looks
And
like a bong too. Yeah,
it
it's
does look
vaguely
like a bong.
bong-like. Yeah, yeah.
But bong-esque,
Yeah,
bong-esque.
right.
But basically, when you feed fresh beer out of a tap through the Randall towards a pint glass, it kind of goes between the tap and your pint glass. The natural alcohol in your beer acts as a solvent, and it pulls whatever natural, essential oils on whatever or flavors are whatever you've loaded that chamber with. So originally for us that was whole leaf hops, but we've put Sour Patch Kids, coffee, licorice root, vanilla beans, so cocoa nibs, so lots of things. But I first developed it because we had an East Coast versus West Coast competition in around 2002 when Dogfish, 90 Minute was really just coming out of the gates, and things like Pliny for my buddy Russian River,
Sure, the Chalurzas.
Adam
Yeah, yeah.
Avery, and our buddies Adam Avery and Vinny and Tommy Arthur. So, again, through Beer Advocate and just early social media, we're like, decided of a competition. So a bunch of East Coast brewers took a bunch of West Coast brewers on at Brickskeller, which was the first sort of craft beer OG, Mecca in DC. And I was like, oh shit, I know these guys are going to bring some good stuff. I better come up with something. And I was at a scrapyard and I found a bunch of, stainless steel food grade metal stuff stuck together. And I was like, wait a second, that valve here, this valve here. And we, again, MacGyvered together this machine that allowed you to kind of dry hop in real time as you were serving the beer. that's how Randall was born. But one time I was taking a Randall through an airport, and I was on a cell phone with Mariah, and I put it through security, and I had in one bag, in one part of my bag, a Ziploc of whole leaf hops, and on the other side of my bag, I had this chambered contraption. And all of a sudden, they had dogs around me. They brought me in a secret room in the Philly airport, and they're like, "You're going to jail for at least a year with how much pot you have on you." I'm like, "It's not pot," and they're like, "Bullshit." They're holding the whole leaf hops in their hands, like, "This is pot." And I guess they do some tests where they burn it, and they can see that it doesn't have THC. But it was a pretty stressful hour. I was on the cusp of a cavity search, I think.
That reminds me, we had Dave Burkhart, the recently retired historian at Anchor Brewing Company, who worked very closely with Fritz for 3 decades, and he tells a story of Fritz driving around the Bay Area with a baggie of hops on his passenger seat. But in Fritz's case, he was trying to get arrested to drum up attention for using whole leaf hops at Anchor. It never worked though. Dave Burkhart said he never got caught by the authorities. So you were a little bit less lucky than Fritz Maytag, the godfather of American craft beer. But nonetheless, whole leaf hops look a little bit like marijuana,
Right.
enough to law enforcement to take you into the back room at the Philly airport.
I'm guessing the city of San Fran and Haight-Ashbury,
Right.
they'd seen garbage bags full of stuff like that before and were nonplussed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Dave Burkhart said that the hardest thing in the world would be to get arrested in San Francisco in 1971 for marijuana. So it's not going to happen,
Right. That's a great story.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us for Taplines. Thank you for the 90-minute, of course, and for the stories. My last question for you is, you've reached, I would say, a pinnacle, if not the pinnacle, of what can happen with an American craft brewery. Obviously, in 2019, Dogfish Head and Boston Beer Company become one. You've got more resources at your disposal than you've ever had in your career, I'm guessing. Dogfish Head is not only producing beer, but is producing canned cocktails, has the distillery, has the hotel. You've got all these things going on. It's not the slapdash, fly by the seat of your pants operation that it once was in 1995 or 1999 when you first came up with 90 Minute. Do you miss the tinkering? Do you miss going to the scrapyard and picking up an old rusty or an old football table or whatever, and coming up with something fun to do with it?
And I'm walking out here to show you something, because the reason I say no is we're still letting our freak flag fly with small batch brewing. Like, as I told you, I'm at our cabin here at Dogfish Head.
The namesake.
It's got 2 little cabins. Yeah. And if you can see up there, if you look up there, is the window to the bigger cabin.
Yep.
And it's got a little tiny 2-barrel brewery that we installed in it. You see the brewery in the window?
Yeah.
And so that little system built into the cabin here, the tanks are filled with a beer mead hybrid brewed with spruce tips from Colorado and Maine honey. So it feels just like when we open, we're as experimental as we've ever been. And that's what gets me. I'm proud to be an officer of a public company. I'm proud of everything Boston Beer's achieved and Dogfish. But, having so many coworkers that are passionate about the recipes first, and then how are we going to sell them second, is what gets me up every day.
Well, very impressive, my man. One day, maybe, I hope to come bother you and your family on Dogfish Head, only if I'm invited, of course, and I'll be looking for maybe a pint of whatever you got going on in the 2-barrel system.
Open invitation, Dave.
Thank you so much, Sam Calagione. You're welcome anytime on Taplines, and enjoy the rest of your vacation, my friend.
Thanks, and thanks for just being such an awesome evangelism for the brewing movement, Dave. So thank you very much.
You stop it. No compliments for me on my own show. It's humiliating. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sherino, managing editor Tim McCurdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.